Hello and welcome to my astrology channel. I would like to take this time to discuss the Mars-Saturn aspect in relationships. So relationships can be synastry between two people in a romantic relationship, or between two people in a friendship, or just any kind of human interaction. Um, I wanted to take the time to record this because I've been interested in astrology for a very long time. I'm 27 now, so I've been into astrology for about 12 years, more or less. And in that time, I haven't taken any professional classes or anything, but I've just read a lot of online articles and dabbled in different kinds of astrological systems, and I feel the things that I've learned have really helped me understand interpersonal relationships and human psychology. So the Mars-Saturn aspect, for those of you who don't know whether you've had this aspect, or if you don't know how to determine if you have this aspect in synastry, I would suggest that you go to astro.com and just make those free charts for you and the person in question. And if you see that, for instance, your Mars is in 12 degrees of a sign and the other person is in the 12 degrees of another sign, depending on the signs, it's very likely that there is an aspect there. But, most people, I assume, who will check out this recording have already gone through the basics of astrology and pretty much know to determine if there is any kind of aspect between Mars and Saturn. So, what I have to say is, when it comes to the hard aspects, which are Saturn square Mars or Saturn opposite Mars, this aspect is extremely difficult in any kind of relationship. But ironically, it's also a kind of aspect that glues two people together, whether they are compatible or not, because Saturn has to do with responsibility, a feeling of responsibility, and it also has to do with commitment. And so a person who has their Saturn aspecting one of your planets will feel a strong desire to make some kind of a commitment towards you, and that oftentimes results in a long-term relationship. Whether it's romantic or a friendship or a business partnership, doesn't really matter. But what happens with the hard aspect is the Saturn person represents basically our deepest fears and insecurities, and it represents things like authority. It represents control. So everybody has a Saturn, so everybody has some area in their life where they have these massive insecurities, and they strive for control, they strive for status. It also represents discipline, it represents inhibitions, and also old age and anything to do with basically the limitations of physical reality. And Mars, on the other hand, is the archetype of the warrior. Mars is like basic vitality, your like level of physical energy, your physical expression, things like physical mannerisms, your sexuality, your passion in life. Like Mars represents what turns you on in life, the reason you get up in the morning, and all those things. And what happens when you have Mars square, especially if you have Mars square, also with the opposition, but the square is like a constant irritation, with the opposition, because the opposition represents repulsion and attraction at the same time. So these two people could get along half the time, and the other half the time they want to kill each other. But with the square, it's a constant annoyance and constant friction, because the Mars person is really, what happens with the square is, regardless of what these two people are actually like, the Saturn person will be threatened by the Mars person. And what this means is like, the Saturn represents your desire for control and your desire for order and discipline in life. And when someone's Mars squares your Saturn, it means that this person's physical behavior, mannerisms, and everything that comes natural to them, their physical energy and their passion will be threatening to you on a very basic level. And what happens is the Saturn person tries to break down and control the Mars person, and this is a recipe for disaster, of course. Usually, I've noticed, I've been in friendship relationships where I've had this aspect, both as Saturn and as Mars, and so I can see it from both perspectives. I can tell you that it's a horribly painful interaction, because what happens is, Saturn will constantly try to break down the Mars person, and it may not necessarily be in a very overt way, they will start, physical arguments, but it'll be subtle things. Like, for instance, as the Mars person, maybe you are positive about a new project that you want to undertake, and you're really optimistic and you're really happy and beaming with enthusiasm, and meanwhile the Saturn person is staring there, giving you these looks like, oh, you're such a naive idiot. Even though, or you will perceive the Saturn person as a very restrictive person, a very critical individual. So it may not be like Saturn will literally tell you, oh, your dreams are ridiculous, get over yourself. But they will just literally look, they will stare at you in a weird way, or will just behave in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable and makes you feel like you're being criticized. And over time, what happens is the Mars person becomes fed up. The Mars person becomes more and more irritated, to the point where they will become aggressive towards the Saturn person, and they will, lash out. Like, if Saturn will say, I don't know, you're so immature, Mars will lash out and will be like, you don't understand me, you just don't get my plans, and you're so inhibited, etc., etc. So it's like a recipe for disaster, because the Saturn person will not ever give up the desire for control. And what happens is, the more the Mars person becomes aggressive, the more the Saturn person tries to put them down and break down their confidence and try to control them. And until eventually the Mars person wants to leave the relationship, and the Saturn person even then will be even more angry, and sometimes can try to, hunt down Mars and retaliate in the worst case scenarios. Now, this is with the square and the opposition to a certain extent. With the conjunction can be seen as both positive and negative. Oftentimes you see these aspects in synastry between people who have been in really long-term relationships, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these are very happy relationships. It really depends on the nature of the aspect in question. Of course, it also depends on other aspects between the entire planets in these two people's charts. But just referring to Mars-Saturn, what I've personally noticed is, the squares are impossible. Again, I've been in a situation where I've been the Saturn person, and I've been in a situation where I have been the Mars person. And these things have checked out exactly as I've described them previously. When I was the Mars person, um, I just realized that the Saturn person was literally draining my energy. Like they were constantly either nagging or critical or just subtly disapproving, whichever the case. It was like literally they were like psychic vampires sucking the energy out of me. And what happens is like sometimes as the Mars person, you literally feel as if the Saturn person is draining you physically. I actually got to the point where I felt relief when I separated from this person. With the conjunction is more positive than either the square or the opposition. Still, even though the negative aspects can still manifest, the good thing about the conjunction is these two people can really be very efficient together as a team. Because Saturn represents long-term planning, discipline, hard work, reason. It represents knowing how to work within physical limitations like deadlines, like limited resources, etc., etc. And Mars represents passion and, um, you know, energy, and Mars people represents like the Mars archetype in a person's chart represents the warrior within, like the crusader, the person that has a dream and is not afraid to go after it, full blast. And so when you see these two aspects, these two planets in conjunction between two people, they will make a very, very good working team. Whether they are in a romantic partnership or whether they are in a business partnership, but obviously this is a really good aspect for business or colleagues, partners. In a romantic relationship, it also adds to long-term sexual compatibility, because Saturn represents, again, long-term aspects. But what I mean by long-term is like anything Saturn touches is something that takes time to unveil. And Saturn is all about being thorough and about taking your time to do something of quality. So when you have this aspect, really it can be long-term physical compatibility in a romantic relationship. So it can be positive from that point of view, because these two people may not ever reach the point where they really get bored of each other. Because from the beginning, Saturn has a very stabilizing effect on Mars, and Mars can bring out Saturn from his or her shell, and make them let go of their inhibitions. This is as far as the conjunction goes. Now, for the Trine and Sex Style, I honestly haven't seen this very often in charts, but I do tend to think it's a very positive, reinforcing aspect. They're not, the Trine and the Sex Style, they're not as strong as the square or the opposition or the conjunction, but especially the Trine, when it's a tight orb between two planets, it can be a very binding aspect. The difference is here, unlike the conjunction, it's not a very intense union, but what happens is here you have Saturn stabilizing Mars, and it's a very pleasant kind of stability. Mars, unlike the bad aspects here, Mars doesn't feel nagged by Saturn, doesn't feel dragged behind by Saturn's negativity. Saturn is not perceived as a restrictive influence on Mars. Here, Mars will appreciate Saturn as a really stabilizing effect in his life, or her life. And Mars will really appreciate the advice that comes from Saturn, because Saturn here is like the older, let's say, retired general giving advice to Mars, the young warrior. And they can also work very well together, but it requires a bit more of a conscious effort to unite their energies, especially with the sextile. With the trine, it's just natural. It's kind of like a softer conjunction. Again, you can have all the positive aspects of the conjunction without the negatives with these aspects, especially with the trine. You can have, the ability to get organized together, to motivate one another to get things done, and you also have the stability in a relationship. Mars will really appreciate Saturn's loyalty, and Saturn can really appreciate Mars's energy. And so this is a really great aspect in any kind of a relationship. That's it, and that's all I wanted to say for now. So thank you for your time.